Recognized as the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Dingell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Too many treat economic security, national security, and environmental security as mutually exclusive goals, rather than the means to secure real climate protections. It's clear we need to accelerate our transition to a clean energy economy, but to meet our climate goals, Democrats have secured a historic climate investments in the Inflation Reduction Act and enacted a game-changing bipartisan infrastructure bill. But there is more real work ahead of us. Deploying zero-emission technologies at scale across the country will be the greatest permitting challenge in generations, and we must build in ways that do not do harm to our communities or degrade our environment. The climate crisis demonstrates repeatedly that our economic security, national security, and environmental security goals are completely interconnected and demand permitting solutions that match this urgency through both efficiency of review and inclusivity of voices of the communities most affected. I welcome my Republican colleagues' interest in permitting reform. For me, I look at permitting reform as a tool to combat climate change, strengthen our economy, and protect our national security. But we must bring everyone to the table to do this right. We must continue to ensure that frontline communities and those who are fighting to protect their homes are heard. We must cement a critical mineral supply chain here in America. It's critical. We must confront climate change and advance the electrified transportation industry that will lead our way forward. And personally, as the spouse of the man that originally wrote NEPA, I know we've got to protect its original intent and fine-tune it for today's realities. It's not an either-or problem. It's a necessity for a prosperous American future. Ms. Johnson, as I mentioned, Democrats have had a historically productive last 2 years. Between the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we directed billions to improving our infrastructure and deploying renewable energy. As these projects begin benefiting communities across the country, why is it important that we ensure community input is key in the design process? And can you highlight the specific importance of the NEPA process in our transition to a clean economy?
Thank you very much for the question. I want to start off by just reflecting back on some of the conversation that we're having about the economic benefit of the oil and gas industry. I think that we are having an incomplete conversation in this space. We are talking about the jobs that people have. We're, talking about the tax dollars that might be invested in a community. But if we aren't also talking about the $400 billion that we are estimated to have to spend to defend our coastlines, if we aren't talking about the $886 billion of healthcare costs associated with oil and gas operations, we are having an incomplete conversation. So thank you very much for your question. I think that people living in communities have a vision for economic prosperity, for health prosperity. We must ensure that people are at the table designing those projects to ensure that it's reflective of the lived experience that they've had. We've been traveling around the country asking officials in the federal government to meet with communities and local and state leaders. And people have shovel-worthy projects that they are ready to have deployed in their communities. And if we have folks at the table contributing to that ideation, that decision-making process, we will get the best result from our investment in both of those spending bills.
Thank you. To my colleagues, I want to say we need an honest conversation about permitting and the implementation of NEPA in the 21st century. And this is going to mean we need a meaningful bipartisan collaboration. We can accelerate deployment by becoming much more efficient and predictable with clear timelines. We can expedite permit review by rebuilding staff capacity in the federal agencies. We can ensure local communities have meaningful and timely input and retain the right to judicial relief when the federal government gets it wrong. And we can end, and then I'll stop, Mr. Chairman, but I really want to work with you on this because it's key to everything. We can end the environmental injustices of sacrifice zones by evaluating the cumulative impacts of projects in the communities already overburdened with unhealthy levels of pollution. We can do all of this without rolling back bedrock environmental and health protection. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.